Hello, and welcome to the Innova Sessions, a place to hang out with movers and shakers and some cage rattlers in the field of music. Innova is the label of the American Composers Forum, and we champion individualistic musical visions that make the world a richer place. As part of our service to artists beyond mainstream commercial culture, we look at ways to help composers in their careers. We don't do it alone, though. It takes many steps to bring music from the artist's reptilian cortex all the way to open-minded listeners and change lives. Composers, performers, recording engineers, labels, media writers, reviewers, DJs, end users, and anyone else who makes this giant wheel go round. And you've been looking at some of them right there. Today we are sharing the perspectives of one set of dedicated pros, radio folks on the front lines of public musical happiness. Please go round one by one and introduce yourselves after I have said, this is Philip Blackburn from Innova Recordings.
This is Ken Field, and I am the host of The New Edge on WMBR in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm also an Innova artist. As a solo artist and with the group Revolutionary Snake Ensemble. And I also perform with Bird Songs at the Mesozoic.
Well, I produce a program called Fresh Ink for WCNY here in Syracuse, Watertown, and Utica. And I'm a founding member of the Society for New Music, and we have CDs out on Innova.
I'm CHUSID. I am a radio personality on WFMU. I've been there for 38 years. I just don't know any better. Also the author of Songs in the Key of Z and other projects.
Greg, who are you?
Well, I'm one of CHUSID's biggest fans, actually. My name is Gregory Taylor. I do a program of new music on WORT in Madison, Wisconsin, both live and streaming. I've done so for something approaching between 25 and 30 years now. I suppose, like many of the other people here, I also am a performing artist, although I actually have not, as yet, ever released anything on Innova.
I'm Ned Wharton. I am a senior producer at Weekend Edition at NPR in Washington. I've been working here since 1989. I remember going to see CHUSID at WFMU, and we did a profile of the station back when it was on Uppsala campus. But anyway, I've been interested in a lot of new music for a long time. But our show is a news magazine, so we cover all kinds of music and composers and arts and politics for both Weekend Edition Saturday with Scott Simon and Sunday with Rachel Martin.
Hi, I'm Steve McPherson. I'm the publicist for Innova Recordings. I've been there for about 3 years now, so I've sent a lot of product and promos to all these good people, so it's fun to meet them somewhat in person via the magic of the internet.
And the final bit of magic comes from Chris. Who are you?
Hey everybody, Chris Campbell. I just pay attention to Steve's orders and keep my head down.
So here as a label, we're kind of trying to change the world through new music, and we are a non-profit, and so that means that we're motivated to do whatever we can, somewhat outside the for-profit commercial interest. So if we find something that really floats our boat and seems to be like a work of genius that doesn't really fit any commercial mold yet, we can say yes to it and pump it through the system to all of you opinion and taste makers out there who will play it to the great unknown and the great unwashed public, and they will listen to it as they are driving their cars and doing their dishes and run out and buy it, and these people will become household names. So that's part of the kind of giant circle that we think that we're part of, and yet we rarely see you face to face, and so this is a great chance to see your faces made for radio and our faces made for labels, it's true. And thank you for what you do, and also to get your perspective on why you do it. What motivates you when it's really cold outside and there are technical glitches and there's a show to produce every week? What really inspires you to get in front of that hot mic and tell all of those invisible people out there what's exciting about your musical discoveries?
I haven't thought about doing a radio program as something that I've done for a very long period of time. I'm usually a little surprised to discover exactly how long it's been, because I think of it as something that I do every Sunday night. And I suppose if there's anything that motivates me, it probably is a combination of being excited about what I've heard and what I've found, but also it's the best way that I have to pay back the people in my life who sort of introduced me to this discourse and made me the person that I want, that I am now. Many of whom have passed from among us, and I owe them that kind of, there's this great Japanese word that I've forgotten for the moment, that there's the debt that's so big you can never repay. I have that debt for some of those people, and in some sense, that's the thing that makes me do it, besides the fact that it's a habit.
What about you, Erwin? What motivates you still?
Contradictory impulses. I like discovering something new and exciting and then sharing it. That doesn't mean I'm a sharing sort of person. I'm actually very selfish and narcissistic. So there you have, in a nutshell, why I'm on radio.
And what about you?
You know, I've been doing this show for about 8 years, and it's an opportunity, really, for me to sit down and, in a quiet place, listen to interesting music and share it with people out there. My show is kind of like that. It's inviting people into my living room, essentially, and having them hear things that I think they might enjoy. I also have a great opportunity to interview a lot of my heroes and share those conversations with the people who are listening. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity for me. It's just fun.
I grew up in Minnesota, so I love adventure, you understand, and love new music. And the radio station here, WCNY, which is a great classical, 24/7 classical NPR station, asked for a new music program, and everybody was too busy to do it, but I thought I could do it. So I actually do a lot of my listening when I'm driving back and forth to Colgate, where I teach. And I'm always, I mean, it makes the trip go by so quickly when I can put on CDs. I have no idea who these people are, and listen, and every so often you say, wow, that's the greatest. I have to absolutely use that on the program, which has been going on, 17, 18 years, something like that. We try to broadcast a real mix of styles. There's no one aesthetic that we're promoting. So anyway, it has a good listenership, and the station likes it.
Well, NPR is kind of a strange beast, and as far as my own personal interest in music, what I can get on the air has to do with the way it's pitched, either to me or the way I pitch it to our producers and editors. But personally, you know, I grew up in North Dakota, not too far from where you guys are, Philip and NEVA. And my father taught electronic music at the University of North Dakota, so I grew up playing with the patch chords on the Moog modular synthesizer, and he taught new music and music theory, and from an early age I was really interested in modern music, and I worked at NYC in New York and did a new music show for like 5 years there, and just always interested in sort of music on the fringe, and I was a huge fan of WFMU, and I still listen online, and and now some of that sort of has filtered down, I guess, to the kinds of things that I'm interested in pitching on our show. But I have to keep in mind that it's a general audience that we're playing to. It's a news magazine. There's limited airtime. There's more, web space is available now, and there are options to get at it from there. But, if there's good music that's out there that comes my way, and there's a good story behind it, that's really important, then I will try to pitch it and get it on our air somehow.
Ned, can you give us an example of what the last... So I guess what I'm hearing is some people are talking about the idea that the business of preparing a program involves sort of private listening. In Neva's case, listening to things where she doesn't necessarily know what she's about to hear. your situation is about stories. Can you give me an example of the last really compelling story that you felt like you got to tell on the radio about new music?
Well, we did a really fun piece. I think it was on last week's Weekend Edition Saturday with the king of the neoclassical shred guitar, Yngwie Malmsteen. So I knew the name, and when I brought it up at the table, dead silence. But people were intrigued, and he had a new memoir out. He was available for press. We thought we could get him to play. He actually flew down, and we were going to try to get him to play some shred guitar in the studio. He decided there wasn't enough reverb, and he said, "Okay, forget it. I'm not going to play." But he had a great story. He's a rocker, been through the 80s, and drove his Jaguar into a tree drunk, and just sort of went through this incredible life of the classic rock star, backdrop of Marshall amps. So here was a guy, a colorful character. His music, I'm not a huge fan, but he was a big fan of Paganini, and that's who he counts as his biggest influence. So we started off with some Paganini and crossfaded to him shredding guitar. So here is a guy, colorful character with a story, lots of stories to tell, that, if I pitched at our meeting, say, hey, I like this guy's music, it's a great new CD, that's not going to go far enough. So it has to be something that hooks the listener and our producers, that there's something more to tell than, this is great music.
Is that true for most of the rest of you too? I mean, and Erwin too. I mean, Erwin, I know the projects you've brought to Innova are fascinating human interest stories. Is that just a byproduct of the music? Do you look for weird and interesting folks to begin with? Like, what's the entry point?
The entry point is my own curiosity. The entry point is passion that's born of that curiosity. And beyond that is the sense that whatever it is I've discovered that I'm excited about, that I'm passionate about, there's others who would probably appreciate that who don't know about it. That goes back to what I said earlier about sharing, sharing discoveries. And I've also discovered along the way that occasionally that can become something of a career jump starter, meaning this is a way to make money, not just for me, but for the person whose music or art that I've discovered. I don't have a problem doing that. I'm a businessman at heart, but it's something that I have to avoid scrupulously with WFMU, where there's a conflict of interest policy. So there might be something I discover that I can then parlay into some kind of enterprise, but at that point I have to stop, I have to pull it off the WFMU airwaves and let other people broadcast it on their shows.
I play music on my show that's music that I like. I also play music in my own life as a performer and composer that I like. So there's it's a similarity. I think stylistically I like to play things on the show that I would also like to play.
Could I say that how I try to do it to attract an audience is I pick out pieces that I like, and then I try to find a thread. So there's a theme to the program, because people listening may not like this or that particular piece on the program, but they'll listen because they're interested in whatever the theme is. But I don't choose the theme first. I always choose the music first and then try to fit it together. I mean, I love programming like that. Having been a singer all my life, it was fun to put programs together. So that's something, that's what I find interesting to do.
For all you, storytelling is an important part of programming. Is that fair to say, in some sense?
Although it may not necessarily be propositional storytelling. I don't really, I wouldn't really say that I have a method for what I do. If there is a general one, it will very often involve my not being very present on the air. In other words, my show is 2 hours, so it tends to be 40-minute, 30-minute sets, sort of divided in that particular way. And in most cases, except for very rare situations, I don't really tell people what I'm going to play for them ahead of time. one of the things about my particular program, and it may have to do with the history of how it came to be, was that there is no working method. So in that particular sense, I will often play work for people where what the thread that ties the work together will probably be timbral in some way rather than related to the genre that the work comes from. And in quite a number of cases, I work really hard to not tell people what they're going to hear ahead of time. There are some exceptions to that rule. One of the things that's really changed that rule has been the arrival of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which now severely restricts the kind of things that I can play because we're streaming. So in other words, if, for example, for years I did a program on the Sunday closest to Brian Eno's birthday, which was composed of nothing but pretty much every really hard to find Eno cut that I could come up with. The DMCA doesn't let me do that anymore unless I actually take us off the web, right? So that's been a real change in stuff, but one of the things that has sort of emerged over time at community radio stations where, since people pay money to keep us on the air, they just call us out all the time. So if I do something wrong, somebody calls me on it. It's turned out that people actually seem by now, or by this many years, to kind of trust me. And if they hear something they like, they'll call me, but I don't ahead of time say, you know, this piece of work is essentially the result of somebody attempting to apply the rules of Sudoku construction to music or something like that. That would be a cool way to do a show. I've done it that way sometimes, but I actually seem to find, especially with younger listeners who don't tend to define their listening habits by genre, to be really more curious about things that they just, experiences that arise in the course of a program rather than what the show's about. And when I think of my experience listening to WFMU back in the old days, that was what I loved about WFMU. You never knew what was going to come. The possibility of surprise was always before you.
Mm-hmm. So, Greg, you've brought up the idea of having a loyal following and being like a trusted curator with a consistent product and showing yourself as a human to introduce that to the world. Do any of you feel threatened by Pandora, Last FM, RDO, and Live 365, which are robots designed to take over your jobs?
I'd like to answer that. No.
Good answer.
Go Erwin.
Would you care to expand
Can I
on
say
that?
something, Ned?
Yes, Ned, please.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Pandora. We had a big staff meeting earlier this week, and they always, Gary Nell, our president, trots out the numbers on how we're doing and how we're doing well or not so well. And one of the most shocking slides I saw on his PowerPoint was the growth of Pandora. Online listening was like this. And everybody else, all of the other streams of media for listening, including radio, was just way down here. And so, you know, we understand that streaming music, streaming audio is really the future in so many ways. And we have to figure out how to be, you know, part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
There's a way to avoid that. You don't want to compete with Pandora. You want to offer people radio, not just a music stream. You want to offer people radio. There are plenty of people out there, millions I dare say, who still want to listen to radio for the personalities, for the unpredictability, for the spontaneity, and for the fact that there's a human element, that you can even make mistakes.
Right, and curation is so vital to this whole thing, and that's why you know NPR Music has been a huge force because it's a trusted curator. WFMU, the same thing. WORT, it's you know, people turn to these streams because they know they're going to hear something different. It's not just going to be an algorithm that's music from Pandora.
No, that's exactly what WCNY has done here. It's really embedded itself in the community. So they feature certain groups, for example. That's why I can play Society for New Music live performances, for example, on Fresh Ink, and there's not a problem. And they get a lot of support from the community.
You know, Philip, you asked if anybody feels threatened by Pandora, and I would say for me, I'm in maybe a little different situation, certainly than Ned. On WMBR, I'm not competitive with anybody. You know, if people want to listen to what I'm doing, that's great. It's sort of similar to my music, the music that I create as a musician. I'm not really foisting myself on anybody. So if people want to listen to WMBR, listen to my show, The New Edge, that's great, and people do. You know, WMBR is quite popular, and I have a lot of listeners. But there's not a feeling, at least for me, of competitiveness at all. It's the last thing in my mind.
What are some of the kind of methods of feedback that you get from your listeners? Because now in this day and age of blogs and comments and social networks where everyone kind of gets to weigh in on a subject, you're the one with the microphone today and it's going out there into the ether, and maybe you get a phone call in the middle of a really long and boring piece, or maybe you get some kudos, or maybe you get some pledges at the end of the year during the drive. How does that kind of circle of feedback work for you?
I would say we get wonderful feedback, and when we have membership drives, Fresh Ink is one of the highest, we earn more money in 1 hour than most of the other hours. So clearly there's an interest in, we do this on a Sunday afternoon, which you wouldn't think would be perfect for new music, but somehow it has worked.
In our case, perhaps it's a question of the scale of listener-sponsored community radio. I guess now that I'm 1 billion years old and I've been on the air forever, you get stopped on the street. I have people who regularly call to register their interest or lack of it in what I'm doing and attempt, I suppose, to keep me honest. I have one woman caller, in fact, who regularly calls me if I'm not including enough women as composers, performers, or conductors.
Good for her.
So I guess I would say that in the case of a community radio station, we have a large number of listeners who are very accustomed to thinking of feedback as being a direct thing, either online, particularly on the telephone, and that sort of works to keep us honest. The station also pays fairly close attention to the amount of money that we raise. I won't really say that we're like a big fundraiser, except to say that we have steadily raised I guess what I would think of as a sustainable amount of stuff, and slightly more to the confusion, perplexity, and amusement of the station staff. I actually have a pretty large listener base outside of the local broadcasting area, which they all seem to notice. So the joke will be, you have another mini-thon, and the financial director of the station will say, those guys from Australia are back again, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's actually been a really big help for me. How it is that those people came to decide that I know what I'm doing, I have absolutely no idea.
One of the pleasures of the station that I'm at, WMBR, is that in fact, while our fundraising, I do pretty well with my show, but the selection of shows, the programming director ignores the amount of money that I raise. It's truly a non-commercial station.
Wow, that's great.
Who gets a show, where the show is positioned during the day, has nothing to do with how much money we bring in, which is really refreshing and gives me the latitude to play what I want to play. And people do respond to that, so it's a nice thing.
That's great.
I've been on the air for 38 years. For the first 20 or 25 years, it was telephone and letters put in the post office. We might get a handful of phone calls during a show. I might get a letter or two once a month. Once we went on the internet, I could start getting emails from listeners, and now we've got a listener comments forum on every playlist, which we keep in real time during our show, and I'll get anywhere from 150 to 300 comments, obviously a lot of duplicate posts from the same listeners, but perhaps I'll get 100 unique commenters during the course of the program. I will still get the occasional letter. In fact, one guy handwrites me a letter every 6 months, and he hates my guts, and he spills this out in very tiny scrawl over 3.5 pages. And since I know who he is at this point, I simply take his mail and I put it in a larger envelope and mail it back to him unopened. I know I'm aware of how much he hates me. At any rate, what I've noticed over the years, you get a greater sense of who the listeners are. Of course, I meet them during our fundraising marathons. I meet them during our annual record fairs, at benefit concerts. They come down to the station and volunteer. We get feedback that way when people approach me and talk about my show or about the station in general. And the one continuous pattern that I've noticed since 1975, when I get the occasional phone call and letter, to today when I get phone calls, letters, emails, comments on playlists, comments on blogs and on Facebook, the one thing that I've noticed, the one continuous thread is that WFMU is flypaper for misfits and malcontents.
In a good way, right?
I meant that as a compliment.
Yeah.
What do you think some of the most common misperceptions are about life in radio? Because in terms of labels, for instance, the other day we get submissions all the time and we listen to them because we want to find out what's cool and what might go on the label. And the person responded saying, "Thank you very much for listening." I said, "Well, of course, that's my job. It's not like we intend to have the largest possible pile on our desk and refuse to listen to it for months on end. If possible, we want to listen to the stuff as soon as it comes in, just in case it's really, really great, because it's in our interest to find the really great stuff." And their assumption was that we were kind of a barrier to that. Maybe, large corporations, you get ignored and washed away unless someone really raps on your door with a lot of money and persuades you to listen to their demo song or something. But from our point of view, we're really hungry for the great stuff. Do you think that's true for what comes in your door as well? What causes you to pick up some of the music and decide this one yes, that one no?
Well, first of all, I want to ask Irwin. He mentioned the malcontents, and was that the on-air personalities you're talking about, or your listeners?
Absolutely. The staff, the on-the-air staff, the administrative staff, the listeners, the volunteers, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a community of misfits and malcontents.
Okay.
I'm one of them.
Okay. So the method I use, I don't have a lot of time really to devote to the show. So I come in, I do my show for 2 hours on Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock in Boston, and I come in at about noon, and I go through all the CDs that have come in the previous week, and I take 2 hours and I put together a show. I'm an improvisational musician. I do my show in an improvisational way. I pick something, sometimes at random, sometimes because I'm aware of the artist. I go back to the stacks and I pick out something that seems like it will go after what I've just played, and I put it all together in a spreadsheet. So when I go out on the air, everything is programmed, pre-programmed. But the 2 hours before the show, it's an improvisational session to put together a show. Often I have an interview, and so that factors into the show as well. But, Philip, you talked about listening to all the material that comes in, and I'm very impressed with that because there's a lot of material that comes in, as all of us know.
That's right.
It's physically impossible to actually listen all the way through, I think, to everything that comes into me. That's the nature of the world, is that we function as filters. As radio hosts, as a record label, we filter what other people hear. And it's just the way it is. It would be nice if it didn't have to be that way, if I could play everything that came in, but I can't. And so I just play what seems right, what I like, and what I happen to pick up at that moment.
But the way I do it, I listen to lots of things that come in, and I try to get. I love getting whatever is the most recent, but we plan our programs about 6 months ahead of time because the station likes to put out a program guide. So, but I'm open to whatever, and I listen to a lot of things, sometimes 2-3 times before I decide what I'll air or not.
I've noticed that my listening habits have changed over the decades. There was a time back in the 60s and 70s when I would buy, no one was giving me records, buy slabs of vinyl and listen to them so repeatedly that I'd wear them out and have to buy a second copy. That doesn't happen anymore, and it's not just because CDs don't wear out the way vinyl does. CDs deteriorate, they don't wear out. Mm-hmm. But I find that such is my curiosity about discovery, that I rarely take the time to listen to music that I really love, because most of my listening is to things I don't know about. I will put on Pandora, I'll put on KEXP, I'll put on public radio, I'll put on WKCR or WFMU on occasion to hear things that I'm not familiar with, to learn about music. The music that I love, I will then play on the air. And of course, I don't listen to it when I play it on the air. The only time I actually will listen to music that I love is if I burn it on CD and listen to it in the car on a long drive. And if my girlfriend's with me and she wants to talk while the music's on, I often glare at her. Because it's like, Lisa, this is one of the few times I really get to immerse myself in music that I love. So if you'll just bear with me during this one indulgence, and she's kind of used to it at this point. So,
Are there kind of cosmetic things about packaging or the way things look or feel that would affect your decision about whether to pick something up or whether to play it? For instance, how legible the type is, whether it's got the timings conveniently there on the tray card, if the cover is too ugly, or if the first track, we often have to deal with sequencing of albums. Should the first track really be 6 minutes or less, or is it all right to have a 32-minute one since that's how long the piece is?
I think that the design of the package does matter to me, even though you would like to say that it doesn't. But to me, a musician's sensibility ties over to their visual sensibility. Of course, I play things and I find a really amazing work that I just think the cover design is terrible. But I find quite often that when somebody has a certain visual sensibility, that their musical sensibility matches that visual sensibility. So it's a little bit of an indication of where that person's at creatively. I will say that it really bugs me when the timings and the track numbers are not on the back of the cover.
Right.
Because I want to be able to see how long each track is, what the title is, what track number it is, and certain labels just refuse to do that. It's annoying. It doesn't keep me from playing anything. This is a little annoying. I would like to see that information. And of course, I'd like the type to be legible, and it just makes my life easier if I can learn about the music through the text without struggling.
Sorry, I wanted to respond to two earlier threads really quickly. One, I think something NEVA said about the continuity in a program or a thread, and someone else mentioned something about a storyline in a program. I've never believed in those things for my own show. My own show is programmed in real time. I don't plan anything. I bring down a lot of material. Very little of it from the WFMU library. I bring it from home. I collected it during the week. And I throw it on the air in an improvised sequence, and I'm not trying to tell a story and there's no thread. Again, I like surprising listeners, and I rarely pre-announce anything because I find that when you don't pre-announce something, you undermine bias.
Yeah,
when people don't know what they're listening to, they will often like something that they might be predisposed not to like if they knew who they were listening to. And I also like to say about WFMU in that regard, which is full of surprises. When people ask about the station and they're not familiar about it, I say, tune into WFMU. If you don't like what you hear, turn it off and come back in 5 minutes. When you come back in 5 minutes, you may hear something you like. 10 minutes later, we will drive you away again.
There is a real sense in which, with the rise of things like Pandora and narrowcasting in general, the business of helping people form their sensibilities by giving them things that they don't like has really become a kind of an interesting and revolutionary act for programming, because so much narrowcasting assumes I only listen to a single kind of work, and there's a range of perturbability for that work beyond that, and if it's outside of that range, you don't play it. Whereas I think having somebody call you up and say, oh, sweet Lord, never play anything like this again. This is the most disgusting stuff I've ever heard in my life, is actually kind of a great thing to hear. Not because I take joy in being transgressive, but because I think the formation of a listener's sensibility is quite often driven by the negative experience of listening. And that can be tremendously important.
Thank you for range of perturbability. I'm going to steal that.
Help yourself,
I would like to add, in terms of the surprise element, that my show incorporates a wide range of styles. I've had John Harbison on my show, and I've had Charles Lloyd on my show. So, in terms of interviews, so a really broad range, and it matches very, very well what Innova does, and that's what we're talking about. And so I'm just very pleased to have access to the music that Innova produces. I'm not just saying this to butter you guys up, but it's absolutely true. I find certain labels have a range that is really commendable, and Innova is one of them.
Yeah, and a package from Innova is something you open up and say, "Man, I wonder what's in here this time."
I agree with that. And could I just say to Erwin, everything I play on my program, people have never ever heard before. So there's an element of surprise for them as well as for me.
I also want to, maybe we can close out. I have a question for Philip, Steve, and Chris regarding the nice things that have just been said about Innova. And by the way, thank you for releasing the Nick Brook Border Town record, which I just love.
Excellent.
I had Nick on my show. But have you guys ever had what would constitute a hit, something that actually got very much wider exposure than you had anticipated?
I'm consistently always surprised at what is successful and what's not successful. I've been at Innova for 10 years, and I've never, things that I think might be successful sometimes don't transfer over from a marketplace standpoint or even from a popularity standpoint, and things that might not be my cup of tea at all can be very weirdly successful, even with, if it's a niche market and it does well that way. There's really, I've stopped trying to predict, in a way, what's going to work and what's not going to work, because it's consistently confusing, I guess.
I think every so often we do get things that are higher profile, whether it's Harry Perch or Steve Reich's Grand Valley State University performance with Bill Ryan, Maya Bizer, Todd Reynolds, things that really are kind of prominent, and then people discover what else is on the label kind of through that. But one of the ironies is that simply putting out high quality, normal sounding music doesn't guarantee that there's a market for it. There's a lot of music that's really well crafted and competent and really has a place in the world and should be programmed all the time, but it doesn't translate into sales or interest. Some of the wackier stuff that we've done, whether it has a human interest story behind it or not, we find really breaks out. And then there are beautiful things that we think the world really needs to know about this, but for some reason they keep ignoring it. One final quick question for you guys. Digital delivery or CDs? We've got a lot of people in our database, and some of them are saying, well, it's unfriendly to rainforests, so please don't send me CDs, just send me a link to an MP3 and that's fine. And we're happy to deliver that as needed, but I wonder if that's more easily ignored.
I'll take both. They both serve a purpose.
Good, that's what we're doing, both.
The physical object at my station is much more likely to be played by the people who, our experimental music programming block is 9 p.m. on Sunday until dawn. The 2 a.m. and the sort of like 11 p.m. and the 2 a.m. guys tend to not play non-physical music. As a matter of fact, one of them has a real bias toward vinyl, but generally non-physical music. If you are going to deliver stuff, I guess I would prefer FLAC to 320 rips, just in general. But it's more likely that my younger colleagues later will play music that they get from you directly. And by the way, we appreciate you continuing to service us as well, by the way. That's really awesome. Having both for me would be perfect.
So both.
At WMBR, we're transitioning to a digital playback system. We don't have one in place yet. So, and for me personally, CDs are still preferred. It's still what I play. But it's changing, and it will continue to change, I think, very rapidly over the next couple of years. I think it's a good question, but for me, still CDs are best.
And for here in Syracuse, they've just built a new station, and they're also transferring. It's my phone, excuse me, to digital. But right now, CDs are the way to go. Okay.
Good. Well, we're all about crossing multiple.
Sign off.
Yeah.
We're going to all sign off, and I'm going to thank you all. We love you all. Come back again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.